Let me welcome you all to the session Alternative Models for Affordable Housing Solutions, which is part of the UNECE's Regional Forum of on Sustainable Development. My name is Thomas Kelly. I work with Habitat for Humanity International. I'll be the moderator of today's session. Thank you very much for your interest in the in affordable housing and for listening to the wonderful panel of experts that we have gathered to tell you more about alternative models, which we have as Habitat for Humanity identified and experienced, and we'd like to promote for scaling up and bring them to scale across Europe. Notably, we will be talking about two models. One is the social rental agencies, and the secondly is the empty spaces to homes models. The structure of the session is that you will hear from all of the panelists and speakers with their individual contributions, and at the end of the session we will have some space for your questions and discussions. So if you will have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat box, or if you are seeing comments or questions from others that you like, please do react so we can recognize which are the most pending items. I'm, as I've said, working with Habitat for Humanity, as many of other colleagues in the panel here. We are a global housing organization which focused on eliminating poverty housing around the world and improving accessibility and affordability of housing in many regions. But for today's sessions, we will be focusing on Europe, where we have worked both in the Western European countries as well as in the Central and Eastern European sub-regions of Europe. And then we'd like to tell you more about what we experienced and what we think are solutions to the housing systemic challenges, which could be replicated and incorporated in the housing policies either on the local or national level. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the first speaker, Emil Angelo, to tell us more about the alternative models with a focus on Central and Eastern Europe. Over to Emil.
Hi everyone, good morning. Let me first share the screen. Thanks again for letting me speak and giving me this opportunity to provide some information on the affordable housing and some alternatives model on how to address the issue. So when we talk about affordable housing, we know that as of today, the lack of broad societal access to affordable housing is probably one of the most pertinent issues faced by the European Union. So deepening, broadening, and probably updating the pre-existing institutions that tackle this issue would constitute a major step forward for the European community. In 2018, the lack of investment in affordable housing has amounted to around 57 billion per year. So it has to be considered also that 35% of the EU buildings are over 50 years old, and that further investment would be needed in maintenance and renovation. As a result, a large portion of the housing stock do not meet the minimum technical energy efficiency standard, especially in the countries of Eastern Europe. So there are also over 200 million homes in Europe, and there is also a huge number of Europeans that are overburdened by housing costs. That would be around 82 million based on the latest analysis. And in 2015 alone, the housing cost overburden rate in Europe was 11.3%. And it dropped to nearly 8% in 2020, but there are huge differences between different member states. So in the target countries that we did for our research, this varies between 9% in Hungary and 29% in Italy. So when it comes to the affordability of housing, the situation is really not great. And EC research shows that both rent and housing prices in the EU have risen steadily since 2010. So the purchase price of houses have gone up by 45%. And the rent has gone up by 17%. So average home in EU is overvalued by nearly 15%, and that has huge impact on the on the living situation, and especially for the vulnerable people. So this has a serious implication on the rising rent across Europe, and that only adds to the pressure on the family budget that has already been stretched by inflation and energy crisis. So this is also the whole concept of affordability in housing sector is linked to the climate change, and Europe has committed to reaching, we can say, unprecedented environmental and social goals. That's also including a 55% reduction in greenhouse emission by 2030. It's a rather audacious goal, and it also aims to drastically reduce land take and decoupling resource consumption from economic prosperity. So this has also promised, the EU has also promised to leave no one behind, which entails improving equality among Europeans in terms of quality of life and access to opportunity. And this is also very closely related to affordable housing. So decarbonation of the building stock has the potential to significantly reduce these emissions. And the analysis I came across actually shows that that can be achieved between 42 to 60%. So even one of the OECD recommendations to tackle these cross-cutting challenges is subsidizing the retrofitting of the existing housing stock. So the built environment particularly, so it opens a lot of opportunities, this situation that has also been tackled by some movements and also policy level interventions in Europe. So the built environment, but particularly in cities and urban areas, is probably at the heart of achieving the climate goals as well as resilience. So this has basically created a situation that energy efficiency renovations have become more attractive as a result of rising energy costs and construction costs, and also the interest rates. So this also showed that the average return of investment in energy efficiency in residential buildings can from over 13 years in the past to less than 10 years, which makes this a much favorable option for many households. So policymakers do try to respond to improve home affordability, encouraging basically more innovation in construction, with a focus on energy efficiency, and increases social housing supply. So European urban initiatives, coalition and innovation programs are growing. That would include the new European Bauhaus and the renovation wave, and that by the renovation wave, EU actually is trying to double the renovation rate in Europe. So they said priorities include decarbonation of the heating and cooling, at the same time tackling energy poverty and highlighting availability of European funding for renovation. So there is also an initiative to provide better access to financial instruments to tackle the affordability in the housing. So there is available vacant housing stock. This is one of the opportunities, between 8 to 12% in the targeted countries. Those are 4 countries, 3 from Eastern Europe plus Italy. And a significant portion of that is owned by local governments. So there's a potential that can be tackled with some of the initiatives. And the experience from the pilots in UK and Poland, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation that come, is promising and shows that holistic approach to the topic and creating more enabling environment for turning empty spaces into homes can be a solution to the affordability of the housing sector and climate issues. So it is important. It's really important to point out that we should act now, and the policy intervention should basically recognize that urgency, since the unfavorable trends will continue in the years to come. So the latest Alliance research from last year shows that housing overburden rate will increase in Europe in the years to come. So price increases, high interest rates, diminishing purchasing power will continue to put pressure on the most vulnerable population, and these factors can actually challenge the EU housing market, and it has a potential to undermine all the initiatives like the EU Green Deal and the renovation wave. So again, there is a crucial need to address some of this, if not all of these issues and challenges with a rather innovative approach like the empty spaces to home that will make extensive use of the existing housing stock and resources and will basically unlock the housing potential market, housing financial market, sorry, through development of different financial models and instruments that and make a better use of market intelligence and data that's being available. So this is, as an introduction, this would be it, and I think more detailed presentation of different aspects of how to tackle these issues, including the empty space to homes initiatives, will come from the speakers that come after me. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Emil, for setting the scenes and outlining the opportunities. Thanks so much. And now we are passing the word to my colleague Katarzyna Przybilska, who is the head of advocacy at Habitat for Humanity Poland, and who has been very directly involved in piloting both the social rental agency model as well as the empty spaces concept in Poland, very much on the ground. So we are looking forward to hear from you, Kasia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you, Emil, for setting the scene. I couldn't agree more with the issues and challenges that you pictured, and Poland may be a really good example of what are the challenges and what solutions we may test, pilot, demonstrate, and then scale up to meet the real needs that we have on the ground. So Habitat for Humanity Poland has been operating since 1992, and our main focus is to provide housing support. We operate both through direct support to households in housing needs, and as well, our goal is to have a systemic change to impact policies, and we do this through advocacy to impact housing ecosystem. We believe that housing has a crucial role in making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Well-planned housing policy, including social aspects, not being treated as something very separate from the social aspects, can significantly improve lives of families. So over last years, Habitat Poland developed, piloted, and advocated for solutions that increase stock of affordable housing in Poland. And why we focus on that area? Basically because of all of the reasons that Emil just pictured. Low housing affordability is a significant issue, not only in Europe, but also in the countries like, for example, Poland. So in Poland, it's listed among the most pressing housing challenges that are faced by households. And we don't have solid data on it. What I will present right now are just some estimations made by experts or public opinion polls. But it is estimated that roughly 60% of Polish households can buy a flat or meet their housing needs on the market terms. And over 70% of people consider housing unaffordable. This is scary. This is such a huge numbers that something really needs to be done about that. Those challenges were growing for years in Poland, and last year with interest rates increasing and access to mortgages becoming so difficult, it brought big difference. So year-to-year decline in mortgage lending in Poland exceeded 70%. We have inflation of 17% and energy prices that increased by over 40%. So this all brings the really difficult picture and makes the housing challenges something that we need to answer to right now. And there are some solutions that are already tested in Poland and are really useful in this context. One of those solutions are social rental agencies. Habitat Poland piloted this solution in Warsaw since 2017, and before that we did big research to check the feasibility of the model in Poland. The model is well embedded in Western Europe, but in CEE region it wasn't that popular a decade ago. So we've been piloting this since 2017, and last year our programmatic activities were shifted to support people coming from Ukraine. We scaled up the operations, and currently the program operates around 200 apartments and is still growing. Under this program, Habitat rents flats on the private market from private landlords and offers those flats at affordable rent to people in housing need. Before 2022, we negotiated lower rent with the landlords, presenting the opportunities that the program gives to the landlords, like being sure that the rent will be paid on time, that no matter what happens with the apartment or with the tenants when they move out and someone new will move in, and then there is this period, this gap period, the landlord will always get their rent. So because of those advantages and guarantees, we expected the landlords to lower the rent by 20%. Last year, as I mentioned, it was difficult and a lot of change on the rental market. So we also introduced financial subsidies to make the rent affordable for the families. Additionally, this program also offers access to additional services like language courses, vocational training, or childcare support. We offer financial support for the families to access the services because we believe that this is part of bigger picture of the more holistic support that the families may need to empower them and let them make this on their own on the private rental market. So this is like an integrated approach to housing and social services. And as mentioned before, we do not only provide direct support, we also focus on advocacy. That's why when we noticed that the social rental agency model was working really well in Warsaw, we started advocacy around that, presented the model to the national government, local authorities. There was City of Poznań who also implemented social rental program in the city. And thanks to that, the social rental agency model was legally regulated in 2021. So currently in Poland, local authorities may start SRA and may use this tool as part of housing policy. In this model, local authorities decide whether to start it, who will be the target group, what kind of additional services will be offered to the families, and who will operate SRA. So SRAs may be offered by non-governmental organizations, and this is a great example of how the third sector can be involved on a systemic, as a part of systemic solution in providing housing to people in housing need. It's also worth mentioning that the model is growing in Poland, and right now we have a governmental pilot project called Mutually Supportive. The goal of this pilot is to support vulnerable communities, people coming from Ukraine to Poland, but also vulnerable Polish population. And the pilot has 3 components: housing, education, and access to job market. And under the housing component, social rental agencies and renovations of empty spaces are included. So the models are being recognized and are growing, are being scaled up. And this is really, really impressive that we are at this point in Poland. So as I mentioned, renovations of empty stock, empty spaces are also part of this pilot. And this is another solution that it's worth mentioning. This is a way of increasing housing stock using what's already there without the need of building new stock. And in Poland, we have quite a plenty of vacant premises. According to 2021 initial census data, around 12% of flats in Poland are uninhabited. Additionally, according to the Central Statistical Office, at the end of 2020, local authorities possessed over 63,000 of vacant apartments. So this is already a stock that may be used. And Habitat Poland, along with our colleagues from Habitat for Humanity Great Britain, we are implementing the Empty Spaces to Home project. And as part of this project, 2 years ago, we commissioned a big research on the empty spaces in Poland and potential of conversion into affordable housing. The results shown that there is a potential in activating the available inventory of vacant properties for affordable housing. And putting even part of this stock into operations, this would significantly impact housing situation in Poland. And renovated apartments may be used for social rental agencies. Bringing those two models together can be used as part of municipal housing or other forms of affordable housing solutions. It's also worth mentioning that in Poland, local authorities may use central government funding for renovations of municipal housing stock through subsidies from the Polish Development Bank, so-called BGK. And those funding subsidizes up to 80% of the investment. So this is significant support for local authorities in renovations and building new housing stock. So Habitat Poland, under the pilot project of empty spaces, renovates underused properties belonging to municipalities in cooperation with local authorities. This is another example of bringing together those two sectors, public sector and NGO sector, together to make real change in the housing situation. And to scale up this model, we also consider that involvement of private sector would also be important and crucial for scaling up. So to sum up Polish from the ground situation, we really need improvements in our housing ecosystem. And in order to ensure that cities and human settlements are inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, we need to provide people with access to decent, affordable housing. And this will facilitate improvements for those families in every aspect of their life, accessing job markets, improving their chances, building stability and empowerment. So I would advise to scale up these good practices that we have in Poland and work further from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasia. Very interesting points. I've heard so many times the argument of how many empty spaces are available, and I still found it very staggering that there is this discrepancy between people, the demand for affordable housing, and at the same time there is a housing stock which remains unused. So yeah, thank you so much. And now bridging it from the experience in the Central and Eastern Europe over to UK. I would like to invite my colleague Tum Kazunga, who is the National Director of Habitat for Humanity Great Britain, to tell us more about the experience and the context in the United Kingdom. Over to you, Tum.
Thanks, Thomas, and good morning, everyone. Great to be here. It's been really interesting hearing Kasia and Emil lay the foundations, and obviously the context can be very different, but actually it's the similarities that are always astounding for me. Across Europe, and in the context of Great Britain, we've been established since 1995, and as Habitat for Humanity, we have a very clear mandate to ensure that people have enough decent shelter to live a good and fulfilling life, and this applies, of course, in the UK as well as overseas. Now, there are particular challenges, of course, that have affected how we can go about doing this work across the UK. And a lot of these have already been highlighted by my colleagues. But just to share some other interesting points. So in the context of the UK, we can talk about affordable housing, but also really social housing. And I'm going to focus on the social housing component here. And the last stats I saw, and of course, these figures might vary somewhat, but the trends will be correct, is roughly in 2020, 2021, there are approximately 1 million households across the UK who are on the waiting list to access social housing. In that same year, approximately 29,000 or 30,000 social homes were either sold or demolished, and 7,000 new social houses were built. So it's that disparity that really highlights the issues and the challenges that those of us involved in this space really have to overcome. And, when we think about it, there are only 3 ways really that we can provide more social housing. You can build new homes, you can use existing homes, or you can somehow convert existing infrastructure into social housing, right? From our perspective, the first 2 options aren't really viable in the context of the UK, as across many European and global countries, the high cost of land, precludes organizations like Habitat from really competing, if you will, to buy land and to build new homes. So, as an organization, we've been focusing on how we can retrofit existing spaces, empty spaces, and sort of take that forward as our focus. We very much look upon ourselves as a catalyst. It's not for us to become a massive social housing home builder, but rather, we consider that as Habitat, what we can do is highlight new ideas from across the network and across the space. We can test those practically because we do build, and then we can disseminate those learnings to try and advocate for change, to try and get more organizations to adopt the approach in order to secure the housing that they desperately need. And so our focus initially has been on this area of working with local authorities and vacant commercial space. So I really want to make that difference between empty homes and really, vacant commercial space, which is what I'll talk about here. As Kasia mentioned, we worked together with our colleagues in Habitat Poland to publish some research in 2021 that, explored some creative uses and how you can use redundant or underused council space, right? And I'll share the link. I'm sure we can look to share the link to the viewers later on. But in essence, some of the key findings from the research highlighted that out of there are an estimated sort of 7,000 commercial and business premises that are vacant, that are owned by local authorities. And in fact, we consider this is probably even higher post-pandemic. And, we think these spaces would, if converted properly, have the potential to create just over 19,000 residential units for social housing. Now, we know on average, each council owns approximately 18 commercial or business properties that have remained vacant for over 12 months. And we know councils have tremendous pressure in looking to house families on the waiting list who they're responsible for. So there's obviously a massive potential with this model. What we know as well is that, working together with the council, we've been piloting an approach as to how this could be done. So for the last sort of 2-3 years, we've been working with the council in East London to actually develop some of their vacant commercial spaces into social homes. And we've proven the viability of that approach. Yes, of course, you can do this. You can create good quality, excellent housing that is required by some of the most vulnerable people in our societies for local authorities, and actually result in them seeing a tremendous saving as well. So, that has the potential. But what we're excited about now is, what more can we do further with that? As going back to my point around, we view ourselves as a catalyst. The point now is to say, right, we've got some initial learnings, what next? So we're about to launch a toolkit. And again, we'll be happy to share links to anyone who's interested so they can access some of these virtual roadshows. But we're sharing a toolkit in order to provide any organization interested in developing housing using this approach with our learnings to date. So this will be a live document that we envisage will be edited, expanded, refined as time goes on. But in essence, it's going to demonstrate what it is that you need to do as an organization in order to convert vacant commercial properties that might exist in your community into the housing that you require. We're also launching an app which will allow for civil engagement and allow the public themselves to get involved in this space by actually reporting potential empty and vacant commercial properties that exist in their communities. Again, looking to try and see whether we can build a database that's perhaps to support what already exists, something that's a bit more accurate, a bit more up to date, would be the goal around that. Obviously, a key part of what we're looking at is these key lessons, right? But first, before I come onto that, let me just talk about sort of the future. So we've seen this can work from the context of local authorities, but there is a much wider potential, and this has been touched on again by colleagues, right? We're talking, the research we highlighted looked specifically at local authorities, but it also made an interesting point, which was that there's an estimated 170,000 privately owned commercial and business premises that are vacant across the UK. Again, a very conservative figure. And so if we consider the possibility that a significant amount of these properties could be used and be converted properly into good quality social housing, you then begin to see that this approach can be an important part of the mix that's needed to increase housing stock. And really, that's the point that we want to make with our future work. So some of the questions we'll be looking at, and we touched on this, and Emil and both Katja has, is finance, of course, blended finance. We've been funding this work in a number of two ways. One, through loans, but also through grants. So we're really keen to further explore how this blended finance model might be able to work. And really, of course, if we're looking at doing this at scale, how can government support be leveraged to unlock further private sector funding? That's the real question, I think, that, would really love to find out and to test that. How can this approach work with other vacant commercial spaces? So we've been talking about very much tertiary or high street type empty spaces. So it could be some old storage space above a small shop. So it can't, it's got a limit in size, but, we know, for example, there's vacant office blocks. There's, district and secondary shopping centers that are also struggling as models and landscapes change around us. What's the potential for this approach to work with those types of spaces? So that this really becomes an approach looking at the whole regeneration of communities as well, and how housing can play a role within that conversation as well. How can smaller community organizations use this approach to unlock the housing that they need in their community? So again, we're speaking to many organizations who can see the viability of this, but just don't know where to start. And hence, that's one of the reasons for this toolkit that we're talking about, at least to give them a bit of a pathway to explore. But also what further research is needed to help other stakeholders to actually try and get involved in this space. So already we are going to be looking at further research planned. So we're looking at research in Great Britain, and Poland again. So we're working, carry on with our great partnership. But we're also going to be expanding this into Germany, Ireland, and Italy to begin to look at the potential of what's possible. And I think, just to finish up on sort of key lessons, there are obviously technical lessons. Some of this work is hard, and there's no denying it's expensive. There's always unforeseen issues that crop up, just asbestos, for example. So you have to be very, very nimble and alert when you're sort of project managing these types of work. Funding, as we discussed, it needs to be part of that bigger vision around regeneration of communities. Otherwise, I think, we're going to miss a massive opportunity here. And so what we're saying is this really needs a broad church. It's a movement that we need to build. We've started this in a small way together with Poland. We've got a coalition in both countries that's inviting a range of different partners on board: private sector, academia, local authorities, governments. And I think that's probably the way to go. So I'll stop talking now, because I know I can talk a lot about this topic. But yeah, I look forward to engaging with other colleagues as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tumen. What a great point to finish your contribution, that it really requires a wide range of stakeholders that if we want to address all of these topics. Thank you so much, Tum. And now I'd like to invite Anna Balogi, who is a sociologist and a researcher, and we're very much looking forward to hear from you, Anna, about the research on empty spaces and good practices in the social rental agency model. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this event. And I prepared a presentation that I will share right now. Oops. Can you see it?
We can see it.
Yeah.
It looks great.
Okay. So what I prepared will reflect on all three speakers before me. First of all, I would like to speak a little bit about the research that we are conducting for Habitat for Humanity International at the moment for empty spaces across Europe. And as we could hear from the previous presentations, Empty Spaces to Homes project applies a holistic approach, because it includes both environmental, social, and economical aspects of repurposing empty spaces. It aims to reduce the carbon footprint of instead of constructions. Also, it aims to provide affordable housing for people in need, and it doesn't include only vulnerable groups, but housing crisis also affects more and more mid-income households across Europe. In these empty spaces research, we will build on the experiences of the pilots that we could just hear about in Great Britain and Poland. And the main goal of this research and proposal is to motivate the recycling of buildings by enabling the environment to do so. For this, we will map the possible partnership and financial models. And also, as it was said before, the direct interventions through demonstration projects will prove that this model is working. And it was also mentioned that we have some countries that we include in this research. The scope of the research now includes Great Britain and Poland that were the pilot countries of the program. And besides, we also have Italy and some Central Eastern European countries such as Croatia, Hungary, and Slovakia. And because we have so many Central Eastern European countries in this research, I would like to highlight some of the main characteristics of housing systems in this region, because it is very different than from the Western European housing systems. In Central Eastern European post-socialist countries, the home ownership is predominant. The housing stock owned by municipalities is very small and is diminishing, especially the social housing stock that is available. So as Tom said, the numbers are similar or even worse in Central Eastern Europe for the waiting list for social housing and the supply that is available. It's also important to note, comparing to Western Europe, that the private rental sector is rather underdeveloped, and in most, not all, but in most Central Eastern European countries, it is not sufficiently regulated. And due to the housing and economical crisis and the war in Ukraine, there are serious affordability issues, especially in larger cities in recent years. And as Emil mentioned, there are also serious energy efficiency issues in private households. Oh, sorry. And here are some numbers that also show that comparing to the EU average, the tenure status and the structure is very different in Central Eastern Europe, with the very high proportion of home ownership. I brought you a few data about overcrowding and living conditions of people in Central Eastern Europe. What is important to see here is the orange columns that show those tenants who rent their housing for a reduced price or for free, that they live in an even worse circumstance than others. And we collected some data on empty spaces across Europe, as Tom and Kasia also mentioned these figures, but there's an average number following the Eurostat that in the EU 28 member states there is over 15% of dwellings that are unoccupied, which means that they have been unoccupied for the past 12 months. Also in Hungary, there's about 12% of empty flats in the country, and 10% of municipality-owned flats are also empty. And the figures are similar in Poland and Slovakia as well. So we can see that it is not unique that a country has so many vacant and unused dwellings, and it refers to both residential and both commercial and business premises. Now, very briefly, I would like to present a good practice from Hungary. It's a social rental agency, and it has many similar points with the social rental agency of Habitat for Humanity Poland. This is the first social rental agency in Hungary, and it's run by a small, not small, but now growing, but initially a small NGO called From Street to Home Association. And the aim of this SRA is to involve the private sector in the provision for affordable housing. And it's a model that provides long-term and secure solution for landlords and tenants who arrive from housing poverty as well. Many of the tenants live abroad. That is why their premises are empty. These privately owned flats are rented to tenants at an affordable price, which is set at around 70% of the market price. It's important to mention that all rental price is set individually, so it really fits the needs of the tenants. The rent is always guaranteed to the landlord, and there is no deposit required, which is a very important point also. How it works in practice, this association is responsible basically for everything around the flat. They select the tenants, they arrange all administrative procedures, including the public utility providers, they make the contracts, maintain the apartments, they provide furniture if necessary, and they also provide small-scale renovation if needed. So it's a big gain for the landlord. So far, they have 26 flats. They are all in Budapest, and it works as a model for municipalities and the state to follow, which means that the first district of Budapest also started to implement an SRA following their model, and Budapest City just developed last year a large action plan with the collaboration of From Street to Home Association. This is the last thing I would like to highlight that could be important for the empty spaces to homes programs as well, that they operate with two different target groups. So it's not only the most vulnerable people, but also mid to low income households who are, in this case, public service employees who cannot afford market rentals, which means like people working in kindergartens or some state offices whose income is not sufficient for private rent. The tenants can also receive further support, especially the second group of the tenants, intensive social work, and they are supported in finding employment. And there's a great flexibility in this program. So if someone drops out from the rental, they are supported to find another rental for themselves. And also tenants can change flats if such a case arises. And we believe that this social rental agency model is a very well working model that can be used in the empty spaces programs as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Really interesting data and statistics, and I'd like to bring it back to one of your initial point, which I think it's important to make, is the climate and the environmental aspects of, in particular, the empty spaces to homes program and approach, because we tend to think in the kind of affordability and economical sense and social sense, but it's also important to keep the planet in mind as well. So thank you for that. Now we're moving on to my colleague Elena Milanovska, who is the Associate Director of Housing Systems and an expert in housing, in the housing finance sector. And we are looking forward to hear a bit more about the financing options for these solutions that we are discussing today. The floor is yours, Elena.
Thank you, Tomasz. And thanks all of my colleagues. Being 15, the presentation is a good thing because I can recap almost everything that other colleagues were already mentioning. I'm also sharing a very short slide. Just, okay, there it is. You just let me know if you can see it.
We can see now.
Is it the full screen? Because it's not full screen on my...
It's a full screen. I can see it very well.
Okay, thank you so much. So first and foremost, good morning to everyone and greetings from Bratislava, where I'm currently based. Let me just, okay, so I have to do it like this. Okay, it's working now. So I would like first to give a little bit of a background of Habitat for Humanity International, especially for the Central and Eastern Europe program and our involvement in the social and affordable housing landscape. HFHI is an international development organization, as Tomasz mentioned at the very beginning, with the prime focus on shelter and housing. In this region, in this particular region, we are focusing strategically on 4 main issues. One is the energy resilience, with primary focus on the multifamily apartment buildings and strengthening the homeowner associations. Housing of the vulnerable group, especially Roma, because Roma are the most vulnerable in our context. Housing of the Ukrainian refugees, of course, I mean, in the light of the crisis that is currently happening, and alternative models for social and affordable housing. So the empty spaces and social rental agencies models that we currently have fall under this strategic direction. What we are doing as Habitat, or what is our mandate, is really to facilitate development of the markets by holistically approaching the different housing issues. This in particular is the social and affordable housing aspect, by in-depth understanding of the current gaps in the market and partnering with the different key stakeholders in the marketplace, especially in the particular value chain. And those includes the communities, or the beneficiaries, public, private, and third sector representatives. I will give you a little bit of the context of the social and affordable housing finance landscape in Central and Eastern Europe. And there is a few, I would say, very important things, understanding why these markets are currently, from the housing finance perspective, not as functional as we would like to see. So even though there is available mortgage loans that meets the needs of the clients that already have some certain level of economic security or stability, they are unavailable for a larger segment of the population who are not able to meet the criteria of the commercial banks. And there is several factors that is influencing why these instruments are unable for important parts of the population. And few of them, I would just segregate them in few categories. One is the employment status. So certain groups, although they have a high income, they do not have indefinite employment contracts. The second aspect is the own capital. Most of the banks are requiring 20% or more of your own capital to participate in the real estate purchases, which again, is not affordable for certain groups, and especially the low-income population. Then also the debt service to income ratio, which is defined by the central banks in the particular country, represents the percentage of consumer monthly gross income that goes toward paying some of the debts. And this ratio is not enough for the people with a lower income to access any type of individual loans. Also, other key challenges that are characteristic for this region is that there is a significantly higher rate of housing deprivation, and at least 20-30% of the population really struggle with affordability issues, and this is including also so-called middle-class household. This, if we actually couple with the super ownership regime, because as our colleagues were presenting before, the portion of the public and social housing units, it's really minimal, which is really hindering the resilience of the whole sector. Private rental sector, it's very small, but we did notice through some of the researches we have been doing in the past couple of years that it's growing in these countries. The major problems they are facing is that sector is insufficiently regulated, where both tenants and landlords are insecure. Also, we have informal housing solutions such as legal buildings, sharing dwellings with relatives and friends, and this is particularly widespread in the southeast region of Europe. Another thing what was already mentioned, and I'm just going to emphasize one more time, is the energy efficiency of the residential buildings is very low, and energy poverty in this region is widespread. Most of what we can see here, that existing housing finance instruments are individual mortgages, in most cases complemented by the state subsidies that can be used for home purchase or goes together with the subsidized loans. Primarily, they are targeting the preferential social groups, mainly young, middle-aged class families with children. And this is still a very low percentage of the housing penetration, and still a large segment of the society are not included. Non-for-profit affordable rental sector does not really exist in this country, but there is some at least promising initiatives that we can use and learn from them. So I will be, okay, so can you see the next slide?
Yes, we can see the slide, yeah.
Okay, it's going very slowly at my side. So what are the main bottlenecks to finance rental and cooperative housings? We are really trying to focus. We've done it a very nice research, and I will be sharing the link to this research later on in the chat box. It's still not finalized. We have the launch this week where we have the full report, but at least the investor report is out. And there was a focus on really trying to explore a little bit more the rental and cooperative housing, considering that this is something that we inherited from the socialism or communism previously. But the key bottlenecks in the CE region for this model is really that there is if you're looking in the country with developed rental and cooperative housing sector, these projects are almost always financed through a very long-term aspect, 25 plus years. And it's affordable, which means under whatever percentage of the interest rate as a debt. However, in our region, these models runs up to two main bottlenecks. One is the lack of the long-term project financing, and then the second one is the lack of the robust experienced housing providers. So when we did a lot of interviews with the financial actors, but also with other key stakeholders in the marketplace, we've identified the reason for the short-term financial, it's the lack of long-term financial resources in the region. So from the investor aspect, the lack of adequate regulatory frameworks, and also lack of end beneficiary that would operate in this sector for a substantial amount of time. The first two concerns that generate economical and political framework of the housing markets, but the latter is factor that can be more easily shifted. So experiencing non-profit housing providers do not exist in this region because the institutional infrastructure were dismantled in the 90s under the rapid privatization and liberation of the markets. There are currently some very small organizations, but to scale up, they really need financial resources. So in the nutshell, this is the catch-22 situation. Long-term financial solutions do not develop because there is no reliable organization to lend to, while when you're looking at the housing, potential housing providers, they cannot scale up because there are no access for the long-term financing. So what are the potential alternative models that we are really currently looking at? And I was using this table because I think it really shows what is the continuum of capital when you are really starting to demonstrate and innovate and bring alternative models in the marketplace. So there is a 5 different investing vehicles which can be staged differently. The first one is the philanthropic grant making, the subsidies from the government, guarantee funds. So I would put them all in this first bulk. Then we have the impact investments, the sustainable investing, the responsible investing, and also the conventional investing. If we really want to see this market to mainstream and develop and to become a sustainable place where we can see the models that are continuously developing and reaching more and more of the population, it has to be staged in the way that would make conventional investing or the private sector investing in a place that they would feel a lot more comfortable. So bringing the new catalytic capital investments to bridge the gap of the missing long-term finance can be really something that would be complementary financing next to something what would be a midterm bank loans and cover rather significant part of the total investment that you would like to start as a housing development. So mechanism can be limited duration and can only be used to kickstart a necessary shift for the more mainstream housing finance models and mechanism, and bring the conventional lenders to step into developing market and introduce new, more adequate loan frameworks. We also, if we are looking at this mechanism, it is necessary to have intermediary organization because the catalytic capital providers have very limited capacity to directly engage with the end beneficiaries. So this could be a startup, a housing providers, municipality, social rental agency, whatever it's adequate on the marketplace. Each of the markets, each of the countries have a completely different they have the completely different gaps in the market, different markets that are market players that are engaged, and it's really can be combined in the best possible way for the market. Intermediary organization collect and structure capital, and they can issue toward the end beneficiary, while also they can support with the capacity development to be able to absorb this investment. And this can capacity development are happening on the local level, but also this should be something that we would promote a little bit more, even on the regional or on the I wouldn't say the global level, but the EU overall level. What we really believe that further research would define and help those models to develop and to support the repurposing of the empty spaces or leverage the positive learnings from one country to another country for the potential models of replication. And how we are approaching this is really looking at the market landscape, really trying to understand what are the current gaps, and how we can bring those financial solutions or instruments that would trigger the markets and would unlock the markets in a certain period of time, would nurture, facilitate this market until a certain stage when you can bring a lot more of these conventional investors into the marketplace. We have been involved in the past with a very similar approach, and we have a very positive experience in developing those markets. On one aspect was that we have been directly managing the funds, a few different funds, but also we are working very closely with some other investor. And just as an example, I would mention that we are probably the pioneer and into introducing the housing microfinance on the global level. And we have a project that is 10+ year, where at the very beginning, the risk was very high for the microfinance institution and other financial institutions that are very much involved in the financial inclusion markets. But over a period of time, with the support, technical assistance, a structuring of these loans, we supported and helped them develop and continue developing. So we have currently so many of our partners that have 20-30% of their current portfolio that is in the housing microfinance loans or micro mortgages. Also, we are directly collaborating with some of the development banks for developing the different type of funding that would support the residential energy efficiency of the multi-apartment building. So those experiences really in understanding, in depth, collaborating, partnering, and facilitating this process, we are quite positive that we can bring a certain change. I would say that I'll stop for now. And probably later on, if there is any questions, I'm more than willing, of course, to answer those questions. And in the chat box, I will share the link of the investor report that we have done for the catalytic financing in the CE region. And the full report is launching in the mid of this week. And I can also share some of the links in case someone of you would be willing to attend. That would be all from my side. Back to you, Tomasz.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much for this interesting point, and appreciate your contribution. And now we're moving on to FANSA, and I'm inviting Clotilde Clark-Fouquier to tell us more about the actions of FANSA, which, for those that you don't know, it's an organization that works with the homeless and with works around the efforts of eradicating homelessness around Europe. Over to you, Clotilde.
Thank you very much, Thomas. First, thank you very much to Habitat for inviting me to present today. I have a slide. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Great. So my name is Clotilde. As Thomas said, I work for FANSA, where I'm a project manager working on housing and the social impact of the energy transition. But today I'm here with my other hat, which is the one of coordinating a joint initiative between FANSA, the Fondation Abbé Pierre, Housing Europe, and Habitat for Humanity International. So this common initiative is called Housing Solutions Platform. Basically, together we agree that to address homelessness and housing exclusion, what we need to do is to identify affordable housing solutions. So what we did already a few years ago now is this publication that you might have seen called 50 out-of-the-box housing solutions to homelessness and housing exclusion. And the idea here is to respond to a political space and a social need. So the social need has been clearly explained already by Emil and Katarzyna earlier, increasing housing prices across Europe, both for renting and owning property. And at FANSA, we can also testify of an increase in homelessness over the past 10 years. What we can observe as well, as Emil explained, is the emergence of a housing agenda at European level with, among other things, the new European Bauhaus, energy efficiency agenda, etc. So this, I will send you the link. I thought it could be interesting in the context of this workshop, this Housing Solutions Platform. So those are some of the thematic we've been looking at with the HSP and with these 50 out-of-the-box housing solutions. So innovative construction, activating vacant stock, co-housing, and other topics. But today I've been asked to present a FANSA report looking at how do cities address vacant housing. Because we realize that to address homelessness, you often have to have national and European strategy, but that the reality of the action is starting at local level. So we've worked with cities with interviews, but also desk research, trying to understand what is vacant housing at local level and how do cities address it. Well, it's been mentioned by a few speakers before, but we see a real complexity of vacant housing. First, in what it is, there is no harmonized definition. It can be commercial vacancy, it can be residential. It can be residential because it's a second house, because it's been abandoned, because it belongs to an investor who doesn't want to rent it, or because the owner went to a city or even went abroad. But it's necessary to better understand what is the nature of the vacancy to better be able to address it. And then a second point, which I think hasn't been mentioned, but is very important, is what we can see is a real mismatch between housing supply and demand. So often we have vacant housing maybe in rural areas, where the demand of housing is more in urban area. So this is an important factor as well. So what do cities do to address vacant housing? Well, speaking with city representatives, what we realize is that actually the first thing they need is to better understand the housing stock. And what they tell us is, well, we understand social housing because we have data. We understand owner occupied because we have the data as well. But what is happening on the private rental market, we don't necessarily know. And so the report, you can have a look, I'll send the link as well. The report shows some example of what cities have done to better understand the nature of their vacant housing stock. And I want to stop for a minute with you on one project which I thought is quite interesting, is Strasbourg Eurometropole. What they did is they worked with two of their municipalities, and they said, okay, so where do we start? We start with a survey of owners trying to understand why they don't rent the housing they have. And what they realized is that most of the vacant dwellings they had on their municipality belonged to elderly people who often had a bad experience in renting housing. Or maybe also they were scared to renovate their house because they didn't know where to start, they didn't have the money, they didn't feel they had the capacity to work with entrepreneurs. And so what did they do? Well, they started to, the municipality said, okay, so we need to support those owners, what do we do? And there they started to develop a social rental agency model, or what we call more generally social rental intermediation, trying to provide incentive to the owners through, for instance, support in managing the renovation, tax breaks, and other incentives. And in exchange, then the owners have no say in who will rent a dwelling, but they have a rent guarantee. And then the social rental intermediation makes the link between those who rent and those who own the dwellings. Another interesting example that we've seen in many cities is that cities need to be empowered by a regional or a national framework that enables them to have access to information to identify where vacant buildings are. So in Greece, in Thessaloniki, they used the data from the electricity distribution network to see where there were electricity disconnection and therefore vacant buildings. In France, they've developed a pilot project now with 60 cities who can use a digital tool called Zéro Logement Vacant, zero vacant housing. And the idea here is to look at tax and property database to identify vacant dwellings. So that's for the identification of vacant dwellings. But then the idea is, how do you target the owners to encourage them to put their dwelling to rent at an affordable price? Well, there are two ways, carrot and sticks. I'm not going to spend time on the sticks part because very often this is about tax taxation. But if you're interested, you can see in the report some example of the local taxation frameworks. And the carrot part, well, the incentive part is very often some kind of model linked to the social intermediation as the ones that have been presented before by many of the speakers. But I thought I could stop with you on this model because it's a bit of a variation. So it comes from Spain, the city of Mataró, which has used ERDF funding and is also urban innovative action. And basically what is interesting here is that it is the city itself who comes to be the intermediary between the owner and those who rent. And that the idea for the city is to actually set up a housing cooperative. And little by little, the city will pull out of the housing cooperative. So the social rental intermediation will be provided by the housing cooperative directly. So, and then it's all the things that have been mentioned before. So rent guarantee, support in renovation, and others. Then many of the models we have identified as interesting solutions rely on cooperation between NGOs, cities, local or regional authorities, and others. And this is another example that I thought was quite interesting. One of the previous speakers, Tom, you spoke of the need to have a broad church. Well, this is really literally a broad church because it's churches in Scotland across denomination who got together to set up an information office and basically to say, okay, we have many empty churches in Scotland, many buildings belonging to the church that are energy inefficient. So how do we bring this all together to renovate those dwellings and maybe sometimes sell them or sell part of the land to redevelop energy efficient building and that correspond better to the need of the communities now. And the idea here was that this information was set up by the churches so that they could be trusted by the churches, basically, and could help them in redeveloping their housing stock. Another interesting example, and I think that's the last for me, it comes from outside of Europe. It's a US example from Los Angeles. So in 2020, because of the pandemic, Los Angeles had many homeless people. They really had to house somewhere very quickly. So they developed an emergency accommodation program called Room Key. But past the pandemic, what do? We can't put people back into the street. So we need to house them long-term in adequate housing. So they developed a new project called Home Key. So from Room Key to Home Key. And this project was financed by the state of California. And the idea was, can we convert those hotels where we have put people for emergency shelter? Can we convert it for a long-term housing solution? And so they bought 20 properties. And I think it's quite interesting because it also bounced back to your presentation, Tom, earlier. They bought motels, but also one nursing home, cooperative housing building, and transformed them into long-term sustainable housing solutions. And what the project coordinator told us was how important it was to, from the start, really define the need and the kind of building we wanted to buy, and to look at criteria such as accessibility, fire requirements, to better assess the need for the financial needs to renovate and transform those units so that they could be adequate housing solution on the long term. So this model and others you can find in the two reports I mentioned. So urban challenges housing solution and the 50 out-of-the-box housing solutions that I will post on the chat. I hope it was useful and interesting, and please feel free to get in touch if you want to know more about the Housing Solutions platform or some other FIANSA work on targeting vacant housing. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you, Claudia. Really great to hear about all these different solutions that the cities are trying to do, or wider range of stakeholders, not necessarily just the cities and municipalities. And great to see these examples from all around the world. Thank you so much for that. And last but definitely not least, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Alice Hogg, who is representing the Loudest Foundation, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you, Alice, about how do we can bridge the social aspects with the climate-friendly solutions. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Thomas. So I have quite a hard act to follow a series of fantastic presentations and only a few minutes left, but I think this works quite well because I really want to kind of round off by summarizing why all of the approaches presented today are so urgently needed when we look at the quite extreme climate reality that housing exists within and unfortunately contributes to. So at Loudest Foundation, we're set up with the mission to tackle the twin crises of climate breakdown and social inequality in Europe. And the most popular housing solution put forward to the housing crisis from government and private sector alike is, of course, the pledge to build more supply. But as we've already heard today, this solution really misses the point because in many countries in Europe, we actually have more supply than demand. But not only does building more supply miss the point, it becomes actually impossible if we consider the impact on climate. So if we are to take our national carbon budget seriously across Europe, which we need to do because they are legally binding instruments, we see that actually there can be close to no new build housing in Europe. And this is really important to understand because we've created a myth, I think, at the national level that we can build 300,000 new homes annually in the UK or 400,000 in Germany or 1 million in 10 years where I live in the Netherlands, when the reality is that to keep within crucial climate tipping points, we simply don't have the carbon budget to keep building in the way that we do today. So at Loudest, we've been working on this with Dark Matter Labs, who've estimated that the number of houses that can be built within the carbon budget per year would be around 176,000 for the whole of Europe, which if we divide it per capita boils down to something like 15,000 for a population size of the UK. And to be clear, that's before we consider climate reparation budgets, which should, morally speaking, further restrict that number. So in the context of 700,000 people being reported homeless each day in Europe and 82 million Europeans overburdened by housing costs, this calls for quite radical rethinking of how we resource housing. And for me, it also opens up a fundamental question that I think a number of the presentations today have started to answer, which is how do we build an equitable future in which planetary boundaries and the human right to housing are both respected, when we don't have thousands of new homes coming to market each year, and when we can't rely on the delivery of affordable housing as a proportion of new private development. And the reason these numbers are so surprising, actually, they shouldn't be, but they are, because we've systematically failed to factor embodied carbon into our calculations at the national level and at the European level. And I'll do a quick explainer because I know that the distinction is a bit technical, but it's really important to understand. So I think the first speaker mentioned that buildings contribute 39% of global carbon emissions, so it's the biggest single sector contribution by far. And to break down that number, operational emissions, so the energy it takes to heat our homes and power our lights, that makes up 28%. Embodied emissions make up the remaining 11%, and those are the emissions produced in the process of manufacturing the materials which go into buildings. So the huge amounts of energy it takes to turn limestone into cement and iron ore into steel. And those embodied emissions are critical to tackle because we can never get them back. As soon as a building is constructed, the carbon has already been released and is locked in, unlike operational, which can be reduced over time by decarbonizing energy grids, switching to renewables, and making our homes more energy efficient. So that's why between now and 2050, embodied emissions are expected to far outpace operational, a fact that few and far between are factoring into their net zero targets. And so far, I think governments and private sector alike have focused on operational carbon through incentives to increase energy efficiency, like subsidies and building codes. And at the global scale, investments into buildings highlight this. We see that of every $1 spent on energy efficiency, $37 is spent on conventional construction methods, thereby increasing embodied carbon. And this means that while investment in energy efficiency grew globally by 3% between 2018 and 2019, reaching 152 billion US dollars, which is huge, and that's great, it actually paled in comparison to the $5.8 trillion spent on traditional construction methods in building new. So this points to the fact that the only serious way to actually reduce our overall emissions as a sector is to optimize what we already have. That's because the most sustainable building is the one which is already built, and no new building, no matter how well insulated, or no matter how many solar panels it has on its roof, or no matter actually if it's off-grid entirely, will ever be as sustainable as transforming a building which already exists. So we believe that this means that investors and governments need to urgently shift their focus from new build to transforming existing stock to reduce the need for new construction. We have to move towards a future in which it's simply impossible to hoard space. A future in which built space is such a precious resource, we all put it to maximum use, with serious penalties if not. The fact is there is no climate-aligned future for Europe, which doesn't include a radical repurposing of Europe's vacant buildings, including the 16% of homes that we've heard are currently unoccupied, and reconfiguring how we equitably share that space, including densifying the urban areas we already have and absolutely not increasing sprawl, which is unfortunately what we've been doing in Europe over the past 10 years. And beyond those sort of demand side reductions, we believe we also need a wide-scale public debate about what housing even means in a resource-constrained future. How can we use the climate transition to elevate housing as a human right in mainstream political discourse and fundamentally challenge how space is distributed? Can we leverage existing climate justice movements to evolve a new discourse around spatial justice, which asks the question, who gets access to space and how much is enough? And to get there, we think we need to adopt a new language that centers around transformation rather than repeating technical terms like retrofit and renovation. We think we need to use the urgency of Europe's Green Deal to ignite new thinking on a debate which has, of course, been going on for years and as leverage to encourage the EU to play a new leadership role in housing. Because while the EU and institutional investors have introduced various incentives to promote renovation through subsidies and grants, none of this gets to the root cause of the issue, and none address how excess space is showing up on balance sheets. And in fact, the European renovation wave has yet to reckon with the fact that the materials we need to retrofit our existing housing stock will also produce embodied carbon. So we need to be thinking in radically new ways about how to do this, from bio-based materials to circular ownership and stewardship models, which extend the lifespan of the materials we have for perpetuity. And I'll finish with a last point to kind of round it back to the theme of today, which is that we need to make all of these new solutions affordable. The green premium on regenerative or sustainable design is used time and time again as an excuse for inaction. It's too expensive, we can't do it. But if the renovation rate remains at just 1%, and if it's only the 0.01% who can even afford a sustainable home, then we've lost the battle before we've even begun. Bio-based materials, modern methods of construction, design for disassembly, and the circular economy all offer promising pathways out of this bind. But if we don't bring that green premium down and make sustainability affordable, then these pathways will never get to fulfill their climate potential. So I'll stop it there and hand back to Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Very interesting point, and it's wonderful to finish the whole presentation, the whole session on the on this topic. We do have maybe 2-3 more minutes before we end. I think, Alice, there was a question for you around these numbers. Where do they come from? I don't know if we have a simple answer to that. I'm assuming that's probably a range of various researches, but if you have a direction to point out, please do.
Yes, sure. It is a collection of few resources. I can put a couple of them in the chat now, and then the work we're doing with Dark Matter Labs, we will publish in probably 2 months' time. It's going through final review stage now, so I can share that with the group at a later date.
Wonderful, thank you so much. There was several requests in the chat box for the presentations and the resources that were shared today. So we'll be uploading all of them into the chat box if that hasn't been done yet. We have also shared several other links and resources to the work that all of the organizations represented by these speakers are doing. So please do check them out and join the efforts of what we are all trying to achieve. Tum, did you want to make?
Yeah, just one quick point, and I didn't touch on it in mine, but it's been great to hear all the colleagues talk about the climate angle of this, and it's an area that we struggle with very much in the context of how far do you go when you're looking at retrofit, because this work is already expensive by definition, right? And so one of the questions we've been looking at, and it'd be great to have this conversation in further detail, but is how much are you going to retrofit an existing structure in order to make it as energy efficient as possible? You can go that deep retrofit route, all the way through to passive house standard, but of course then where you're really limiting the number of homes that you can actually produce. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of criteria and in terms of minimum standards around that particular aspect. So perhaps looking at some of my Habitat colleagues, that could also be another useful area to add to our further future research agenda as well. Thank you.
Indeed, great point, Tum. Yeah, so I'll just use the last moment and the last minute to thank you all. Thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to everyone in the audience. We are really pleased to see such a turnout that you are indeed interested in this topic, and please do join the movement, sign up for the newsletters, check out the resources, use the toolkits that we are producing, so that we can only bring these solutions to scale by a joint effort of many different stakeholders. And as the last point really to make is that we as Habitat for Humanity are organizing another session as part of the same forum in about half an hour. So please do check that out. We will be talking about the scaling up of renovations of multi-apartment buildings, which is a topic that we've been doing a lot of work in the past year. So thanks again. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone listening in. And wish you a great day.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.